Have you ever felt your soul twist in the most unfamiliar way? Not from heartbreak, but from betrayal so precise it almost felt surgical? Like the person who knew you best weaponized everything you gave them and used it to cut you out? I'm not just talking about emotional manipulation or someone cheating on you behind your back. I'm talking about something far deeper, something quieter, but far more haunting. If you've ever poured your heart into something, your work, your art, your legacy, and someone stole it as if it was theirs to begin with, then you'll understand exactly why I had to do what I did. This is the story of how the man I married built his empire off my recipes, then tossed me aside like a sous chef on her last shift. But what he didn't know was, I had a recipe of my own, and it wasn't made for the kitchen. It was made for revenge. Stick with me because by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how I turned the tables and served him cold. But before we get to that final dish, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in love with your dream and a person at the same time? Have you ever believed that the two could coexist? Because that's where my story began, in a tiny apartment kitchen in Austin, Texas, with a man I believed would build a life with me, not steal mine from underneath me. My name's Marissa. And once upon a time, I thought I was just a chef. But now I know I was the entire menu. Every dish, every detail, every flavor that made his restaurant famous. It was me. But he didn't just take my recipes. He took my identity, my ideas, and my voice. And that's why I took everything back, including the restaurant that now bears my name. I want to talk directly to you. Yes, you, the one who clicked on this video thinking, did she really steal a restaurant? Stick around, because I promise you, not only will you get that answer, you'll see how betrayal doesn't always end in broken hearts. It sometimes ends in reclaiming your power, your voice, and everything they thought they buried. If you've ever been gaslit, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told, you're just the help, this story is going to light a fire in you. Because that's what this story really is. It's not just about stolen recipes. It's about stolen identity, stolen credit, and the moment a woman decided enough was enough. And she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She cooked. When I met David, my husband, I was just 26, fresh out of culinary school, juggling 2 waitressing jobs while developing my own fusion recipes in a shared kitchen space that always smelled like burnt toast and hope. He came in wearing a white shirt that looked too clean for someone who claimed to hustle in the restaurant world. We started talking. We started dreaming. We started mixing more than spices. We mixed ambitions, naivete, and a belief that love and business could mix like garlic and butter. I was wrong. David knew how to play the long game. He complimented my food, then asked me to co-host private dinners with him. That turned into us launching a tiny pop-up together. My recipes, my techniques, my ideas. But he was the one speaking at the pop-ups, shaking hands, getting the press. I didn't mind at first. He said I was the magic behind the curtain. But when you're kept behind the curtain long enough, you start to suffocate. The pop-up grew into a brand. Then a full-blown restaurant. Table 9, they called it. Austin's hottest new culinary destination. Critics raved about its innovative dishes. Pomegranate glazed lamb with cardamom. Caramelized plantain bruschetta. Fire-roasted tomato bisque with cinnamon-laced creme fraiche. All mine. Every single one. But whose face was on the website? Whose name was in the magazine spreads? Whose interviews played on the morning shows? Not mine. I bet right now you're thinking, why didn't she speak up? Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she fight back? And if you're asking those questions, you're smarter than I was back then. Because I kept telling myself, we're a team. He's just building it for both of us. My time will come. But time passed. And every time I asked for acknowledgement, he gave me promises like seasoning, just enough to flavor the moment, never enough to nourish the truth. You see, David didn't just steal my recipes. He stole my story. The food wasn't the only thing he rebranded me. One night, after another 12-hour shift where I cooked behind the scenes while he entertained investors at the front bar, I overheard him say something that sliced through me sharper than any knife in that kitchen. She's got a good palate, but she doesn't understand business. She's lucky I'm here. That was the moment I realized I wasn't his partner. I was his product. And what hurt the most? I still loved him, even when I saw the signs. The way he'd forget to include me in decisions. The way he told me not to speak up in front of staff because it confused the hierarchy. The way he changed the menu slightly so my dishes had different names and tiny tweaks, just enough to make them seem like they weren't mine. The way he would take calls at midnight and hide the financials. I wanted to believe I was imagining it all. But I wasn't. He was building a brand with my hands and burying me beneath it. The final straw wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't a screaming match or a dramatic confession. It was a piece of paper. A contract. Hidden in our shared home office. I found it while looking for my passport. It was a licensing deal for a cookbook. Inspired by the unique culinary vision of David Lawrence. Recipes listed? All mine. Every one. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was drowning in a kitchen full of flames. That's when the switch flipped. That's when I realized this wasn't a love story anymore. This was a heist. And I was the mark. So here's what I did next. And this is the part where I need you to really pay attention, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just petty revenge. It was strategic. It was surgical. It was justice, served slow, steady, and unforgettable. I started documenting. Quietly. Secretly. Every recipe draft, every original version, every time-stamped email, every picture of my handwritten notes, because when you're taking back your life, you need more than anger. You need evidence. I started building relationships with the staff he overlooked, with the vendors he underpaid, with the partners he ghosted. I didn't burn bridges. I lit candles in the dark corners he thought no one would look at. And when the time was right, when his ego was at its loudest, I did something no one saw coming. But I'll stop right here, because that is where things start getting complicated. That's where the revenge really begins to simmer. You want to know how I took back his restaurant? How the man who thought I was disposable ended up watching everything fall apart, one bite at a time. Good. Because the next part is where you'll see how it's not just about reclaiming credit. It's about reclaiming your power, about knowing your worth, even when they try to package it as their own. So if you're still with me, and I know you are, don't look away. Because what happens next will make you rethink every power couple you've ever seen. And it will show you what happens when the quiet one finally decides to speak, with a bang. This isn't just revenge. This is redemption, and I'm just getting started. After finding the licensing deal buried in the office drawer, I started seeing the entire picture through a different lens. Suddenly, I remembered every moment he'd downplayed my contribution, every time he'd said, "Let me take care of it, babe," when I offered to handle a supplier or respond to an email. At first, I thought he was just being protective. Now I knew better. He'd been isolating me from the business. Not out of love, but control. That made every memory feel different. He used to bring me flowers after a successful dinner service. Now I saw it as damage control. He wasn't thanking me, he was buying silence. And yet I played along. Because I had to. I acted the same. I still got up at dawn to plan the week's specials. I still chopped, stirred, and plated with the same intensity. Because I needed to gather everything. Every thread of truth. Every witness. Every blind spot he didn't know I'd noticed. And believe me, there were plenty. It started with Leo, the pastry chef. He'd been working with us since the pop-up days, and he was one of the few people who knew how deep my fingerprints ran on the menu. One night, after a long shift, he pulled me aside and said something that stopped me in my tracks. You ever notice how he never gives you credit in front of new hires? That was the first crack. Leo didn't know everything, but he sensed the imbalance. He'd seen the way David deflected when clients complimented a dish I designed. That's when I began to wonder. Asterisk how many others noticed, but stayed quiet. Asterisk. So I started watching more closely. The new hostess, Callie, seemed eager, bubbly, but too interested in David's schedule. Too quick to whisper with him in a hallway when they thought no one was looking. I wasn't jealous. I'd moved past jealousy months ago. But something about her presence felt calculated. Like she knew more than she let on. One night, I overheard her asking about a private tasting event that I'd never been told about. I checked the bookings. No such event was listed. Red flag. Then there was Nate, our beverage director. Always nice, always professional, but he'd recently been fielding calls from someone labeled DL Finance on his phone. I spotted it when he left it charging behind the bar. The calls were always under 5 minutes. Always late at night. Nate had no reason to be dealing with financial matters, unless David had him doing something off the books. That's when the paranoia began to creep in. I didn't know who was on my side anymore. Every face started looking different. Every casual interaction started feeling like a performance. Even my friends had started to feel distant. My college roommate Jen, who used to visit me at the restaurant monthly, hadn't been by in over 2 months. When I texted her, she replied vaguely, "Been swamped." But she'd always made time before. Then I saw a tagged photo on social media. She was dining at a competitor's new spot, the same night she'd told me she had to work late. What made it worse? David had been photographed there too, the same evening, at a networking dinner. No mention of it to me. When I asked, he said it was last minute and nothing major. I didn't press. But inside, something twisted. And yet, I didn't let it show. I smiled through every service, through every wine pairing meeting, every public-facing interaction. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, I was building my own plan. I started compiling documentation, old notebooks, recipe drafts, even voice memos I'd recorded years ago when inspiration hit in the middle of the night. Anything with a timestamp, anything I could use to prove ownership. I began emailing copies to myself, to a separate cloud account David didn't know existed. I wasn't just reclaiming my work, I was securing a legal foundation for what was coming. But something kept bugging me. The money. Things didn't add up. I'd handled our kitchen budgets before, years ago, and the margins then were tight but honest. Now they seemed bloated. Suppliers being paid double what they used to, inventory orders being made and canceled at odd times. When I finally got a peek at a payment summary left open on David's tablet, I saw something that didn't belong. A catering invoice under my name. A private event booked at a mansion outside the city. But I'd never been there. Never cooked for it. And yet, there it was. Prepared by Chef Marissa. Someone was not just stealing my recipes. They were impersonating my presence. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts raced. Was he laundering money? Was he setting me up for tax fraud? Were there people helping him pull this off? And what about Callie, the hostess who mysteriously left 3 days later, without notice, no goodbye? Just vanished. David claimed she moved back home for family reasons. But I saw him delete their texts when he thought I wasn't watching. And then came the visit from the health inspector. Random, they said. Just a routine check. But the questions they asked weren't routine. They wanted to know who the official culinary lead was, who handled recipe sourcing. They asked about signature dishes and proprietary blends. Something was off. I answered as carefully as I could, trying to maintain composure while my insides burned. I didn't know whether David had planted something, or if someone else had tipped them off. The restaurant suddenly felt like a stage, and I was no longer sure if I was the lead actress or the final victim in a production I didn't sign up for. Everything was suspect. The late-night calls. The meetings I wasn't invited to. The invoices under my name. The disappearing staff. I started to think, was David working with someone else to sell the restaurant? To launch a spin-off brand using my work? Or was this all smoke and mirrors, a setup to push me out entirely? You see, it wasn't just one betrayal. It was layers. Each revelation peeling back a deeper one. Like an onion, except every layer stung worse than the last. And just when I thought I'd seen the worst of it, something else happened that flipped everything on its head. One afternoon, while digging through some archived emails on our old shared laptop, I came across a draft that wasn't mine. It was addressed to a venture group in California. The email pitched a chain of restaurants, based on his signature recipes, his culinary legacy, his flavor profile. The subject line read, Franchise Proposal, DL Concepts. Attached was a 40-page pitch deck. Page 3 had a photo of me, in the kitchen plating a dish. My face. My hands. Captioned, "Model culinary partner, non-equity." Non-equity. Like I was a background prop. Not the creator. Not the chef. Not the co-founder. Just a model. A marketing piece. At that moment, everything clarified. I wasn't just being phased out. I was being erased. But here's the part that'll keep you up at night, and believe me, it kept me up for weeks. That pitch deck was dated 3 months ago. 3 months before the contract I found. 3 months before Callie disappeared. Before Jen stopped calling. Before the fake catering event. He'd been planning this long before I ever caught on. And I had no idea how far he'd already gone, or who else was involved. I didn't know who to trust. Not Leo, not Nate, not even the kitchen assistant who always smiled too much but never met my eyes. I didn't know if the health inspector was really there to help, or to pin something on me. I didn't know if the franchise deal had already gone through. All I knew was one thing, with absolute clarity. I had to move faster. Because someone wasn't just trying to steal my work. They were trying to erase my entire existence. And they were almost done. My stomach twisted. That hard drive had early versions of my sauces, handwritten notes scanned in from the days I worked out of my apartment. The original chili lime marinade recipe, my very first signature, was on that drive. And now it was in someone else's hands. Whether David took it himself or had someone do it for him, I didn't know. But one thing was certain. He knew I was onto him. Still, I didn't panic. Not outwardly. I knew better than to show weakness in a kitchen full of eyes that might not all be on my side. I played it cool, even when I found a threatening note slipped into my prep apron later that same night. It was a torn piece of receipt paper from our POS system, scribbled with a sentence that made my blood turn cold. "Stop digging or you'll be the one buried." No signature. No clue who wrote it. But it wasn't a joke. Whoever left it knew where I kept my aprons. Which meant it was someone on the inside. That changed everything. My focus shifted from just exposing David to figuring out who else was working against me. I couldn't trust anyone blindly anymore. Even Leo, who'd always been a quiet ally, suddenly started acting differently. More distant, distracted. He used to joke with me during cleanup, sneak me extra pastries when he tested new ideas. Now he barely made eye contact. When I asked if something was wrong, he muttered something about not wanting to get caught in the middle. That's when it hit me. David must have gotten to him. Maybe with a promotion. Maybe with a threat. Maybe both. I started tracing every interaction like a detective working a cold case. I reviewed the surveillance footage from the security office, only to find 2 days mysteriously missing from the feed. The dates? The exact days when the catering invoice appeared and Callie vanished. The manager said there had been a glitch. I didn't believe it for a second. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Nate, the beverage director, cornered me during a staff meeting break, his voice low and shaky, his eyes darting toward the kitchen door every few seconds. "You need to stop," he whispered. "You're not going to win this. He's already talked to lawyers. This is bigger than you think." He didn't wait for a response. Just turned and left like nothing happened. The walls were closing in, but the betrayal wasn't over. A week later, I got a call from my old mentor from culinary school, Chef Julianne. We hadn't spoken in years, but she'd always followed my work. Her voice was tight, concerned. "Why didn't you tell me you were selling your recipes to investors in LA?" My heart dropped. "What?" I asked. "Who told you that?" She paused, then said, "David sent me a copy of the proposal last week. Your name's all over it." I thought it was legit. I could barely speak. He had used my name again. This time to lend credibility to a franchise deal I had nothing to do with. She said the investors were already in talks, and the pitch included photos of me cooking, quotes I never said, even a fake testimonial from a culinary blogger I hadn't spoken to in over a year. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. David wasn't trying to edge me out. He was trying to replace me entirely. Reinvent me as a silent partner in a legacy that I built, erase me while still using the shine of my name, my face, my recipes to secure deals and line his pockets. I was no longer just fighting to reclaim my work, I was fighting for my identity, my brand, my future. But as I pulled deeper into the web, another piece fell into place, and this one turned everything upside down. While going through some of our old catering receipts, I found one from over 4 years ago, back before Table 9 was even launched. It was for a private investor dinner we hosted in our apartment, a quiet night that was supposed to be just friends and potential donors. I remembered that evening well. I'd made a saffron and mint risotto that had everyone speechless. What I didn't remember was the name on the invoice. Hidden among the list of guests was a woman named Sasha Monroe. I hadn't thought about her in years. Sasha was David's ex before me, a financial analyst who broke his heart, according to him. He swore she moved away, that they hadn't spoken in years. But what was she doing at our dinner? Why was her name attached to an investor invoice under David's private account? A quick online search turned up more questions than answers. Sasha hadn't moved. In fact, she was currently listed as a partner at a boutique hospitality investment firm in Los Angeles. Asterisk the same firm David's proposal had gone to. Asterisk coincidence?
No.
Not a chance. It wasn't just that he was using me. He was using us. Our history, our connections, even his past. I didn't know if Sasha was involved or if she was being manipulated, too. But the twist raised a terrifying new possibility. What if this betrayal didn't start recently? What if it had been in motion since before we even opened Table 9? The timeline didn't just shift, it shattered. Suddenly, I had to question everything. Did he ever love me? Or had I always just been a piece of the plan? But I didn't get long to dwell on it. Because that very night, after the restaurant had closed and the last of the staff left, I walked into the kitchen and found something waiting for me on the prep table. A sealed envelope. No name. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. I plugged it into the office computer, hands trembling. There were only 2 files on it. One was a video recording from a security camera I didn't recognize. The other, a single document titled Confession.pdf. But before I could open either one, the screen went black. I snatched the flash drive out and tucked it into my coat pocket, not trusting anything electronic in that space anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if someone had anticipated every step I'd take. If I was chasing breadcrumbs someone else had carefully arranged. But the next morning, things got even stranger. I woke up to a missed call and a voicemail from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Asterisk Aubrey asterisk, my younger sister. She and I had drifted apart after my marriage. She never liked David, always said there was something too polished about him, too rehearsed. We used to be inseparable before I got swept up in the chaos of starting the restaurant, and she eventually stopped coming around. Her voicemail was short, clipped, and panicked. Marissa, someone left a manila envelope at my job. No note, no name, just your name scribbled on the outside. I haven't looked inside yet. I don't know what this is, but it feels wrong. Call me. The moment I heard it, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. Someone was reaching beyond me now, pulling in people from my life who had no part in this. I called her back instantly. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice was tight with nerves. I haven't opened it yet, she said. It's just sitting here on my desk, and I can't stop staring at it. I told her not to touch it until I got there. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in town, a neutral space. When I arrived, I found her sitting at a corner table, the envelope in front of her like it was ticking. She looked thinner than I remembered, more tired, like life had been just as unkind to her in my absence. But her eyes still had that fire, the same one I'd seen since we were kids. We opened the envelope together. Inside was a series of printed emails. At first glance, they looked random: restaurant supply orders, invoices, internal memos from the early days of our pop-up events. But when I began reading closely, I saw something chilling. These weren't just receipts. They were doctored. And not just doctored, deliberately forged to rewrite the narrative of who started our business. Email threads where I was CC'd had been altered to remove my name. Notes I had written in the early planning stages had been attributed to DL, David's initials. It was like someone had gone back and rewritten history one email at a time. That would have been horrifying enough. But one email near the bottom hit me like a car crash. It was an internal message from David to a man named Vin Rojas, dated just 2 months before our wedding. The subject line was timeline cleanup. In the body of the email, David wrote, "Make sure the early contracts are in your name or dummy accounts. She's not supposed to be tied to anything if this scales." I had never heard of Vin Rojas. A quick search showed he was a corporate attorney in Dallas, someone who specialized in hospitality brand transitions. A consultant. A cleaner. Someone David had hired to remove my digital fingerprints from everything before Table 9, even had a sign on the door. Aubrey sat frozen across from me, watching as I reread the email 3 times. She finally spoke. "You realize he's been planning to cut you out since the beginning?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. But what I did realize, suddenly and all at once, was that I had no idea who sent her that envelope. It didn't come from David. He wouldn't risk exposing himself like that. Someone else had access to these files. Someone inside his camp. Maybe a staff member, maybe a former partner, or maybe someone else with their own agenda. That possibility made my skin crawl. Because if someone else wanted David to fall, they might be willing to let me take the hit to make it happen. That night, I drove home with the envelope in the passenger seat like it was radioactive. I kept thinking about the flash drive. I had to find a safe way to access it. I wasn't going to risk another sabotage attempt. I called a friend of mine, Reese, a tech specialist who used to work security for a downtown hotel chain. He owed me a favor. I explained what happened in the most careful way possible. "This thing shut my computer down the second I plugged it in," I told him. "I think someone's embedded tracking or malware in it." Reese didn't ask questions. He just told me to bring it to his workshop. "I'll mirror it and isolate it," he said. "Whatever's on there, we'll find it." But just as I was about to leave, I got another message. This time it was a text. No contact name, just a number. The message read, *, you're not the only one he lied to. Meet me tomorrow. 6 p.m. The old greenhouse. Come alone. *, I froze. The greenhouse was a place David and I had used for early events, abandoned now, overgrown with weeds and shadows. We hadn't been back in years. I didn't recognize the number. I didn't reply. But something about it felt different from the rest. It wasn't a threat. It felt like a warning. Or maybe a confession. The timing was too perfect. It came after the flash drive, after the envelope to Aubrey, after the failed franchise discovery. Whoever was behind this knew everything, and they were watching. So now I had a decision to make. Do I follow the breadcrumb and meet this mystery person, risking a trap I couldn't see coming? Or do I stay in the safety of what little evidence I've gathered and hope the truth makes its way out? Every move now felt like a gamble. Every step I took deeper into this mess seemed to pull someone else into danger. Aubrey, Reese, maybe even my staff. Because whoever sent that flash drive, and whoever sent my sister that envelope, wasn't just trying to expose David. They were trying to reveal something bigger, and I was about to find out just how far this betrayal really went. As I stepped inside, the air smelled like mildew and rust. The interior was dark, except for shafts of dying sunlight breaking through cracked panes. I waited. 10 minutes. Then 20. No one came. No voices. No movement. I circled the space slowly, checking for signs that anyone had been there recently. Nothing. Just old pots, broken furniture, and dust layered like time. Then, just as I turned toward the exit, I saw it, something new. Propped against the back wall, half buried under a tarp, was a small metal box. I approached it cautiously. It was sealed with a padlock, but duct taped to the top was a folded piece of paper with my name on it. Handwritten, black ink, slightly smeared. I tore the tape and unfolded the note. No greeting. No explanation. Just one chilling sentence. You're already too late. I froze. A sound behind me, soft, deliberate. I spun around, but there was nothing. No one. My breath quickened. I grabbed the box and ran, heart pounding so hard it was all I could hear. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and even then I scanned the street for anyone lingering too long, any unfamiliar faces, any cars idling without reason. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the metal box locked in my kitchen drawer and stared at it for hours, debating whether to open it or turn it in. But before I could decide, something else happened. Something that shifted the story from mystery to nightmare. Aubrey didn't show up for work the next day. She had missed a shift in over a year. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I texted. I called. Nothing. I drove to her apartment and knocked for almost 10 minutes straight. No answer. When I asked her landlord if he'd seen her, he said she left early that morning. Rushed, looking spooked. That was the word he used, spooked. Not tired, not in a hurry. Spooked. My gut twisted. I filed a missing persons report, but the officer barely blinked. Adults go missing all the time, he said flatly. She'll probably turn up. I knew she wouldn't. Not unless I found her. That evening, I went back to Reese's tech workshop with a flash drive and the locked metal box. I didn't know where else to go. He was the only person left who might still be on my side. When I got there, his door was open but the lights were off. The place was trashed. Desks overturned. Cables ripped from the walls. A shattered coffee mug on the floor. I stepped inside calling his name, but the silence was suffocating. Then I saw it, his laptop, still open, the screen frozen on a file directory I didn't recognize. A video had just been played, time-stamped less than an hour ago. I clicked it without thinking. The footage showed the interior of a parking garage. Empty. Dimly lit. For the first 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then a figure appeared, blurry at first, but unmistakable. It was Aubrey. She was walking quickly, looking over her shoulder, clutching the same manila envelope I'd seen her open days earlier. Then, just as she reached her car, 2 other figures entered the frame. Dark clothing, faces hidden. One grabbed her arm. She dropped the envelope. The other moved behind her and the video cut out. I backed away from the screen like it had bitten me. My mouth went dry. I stared at the image of the paused video, at her frozen in mid-motion, and I knew this was bigger than stolen recipes, bigger than a restaurant brand. Someone was orchestrating something far more dangerous. And I had walked into it blindly. I called the police again, showed them the footage. They took a copy but said without clear faces or identities, it could be anything. She's probably just hiding from someone, the officer said with a shrug. This doesn't prove foul play. But I knew what it was. A warning. A message. And not just to her, to me. Over the next few days, I felt watched. Subtle things kept happening. My car alarm went off randomly in the middle of the night. I'd find my front door unlocked, even though I knew I locked it. A stranger followed me out of a grocery store and then disappeared as soon as I crossed the street. I stopped using my phone for anything personal. I stopped sleeping. The paranoia wasn't paranoia anymore, it was pattern recognition. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully planned it all was. This wasn't just sabotage. It was containment. Isolation. Someone was cutting me off from every piece of my support system. And then I got the email. No subject line. No sender. Just a single line of text. If you go public, we release everything. Attached was a file labeled agreement /_ 2017 / skin PDF. I opened it. It was a contract I had never seen before with my forged signature at the bottom. A non-disclosure agreement that stated I had willingly relinquished all intellectual property to David Lawrence in exchange for marital consideration. It was backdated 5 years. If this file went public, it would make me look like a scorned woman trying to reclaim something I had legally given away. No court would side with me. No investor would touch me. I would be branded a fraud. I closed the laptop and sat in silence for what felt like hours. I was being cornered, discredited before I could even speak. And still, I didn't know who was behind all of it. Was David orchestrating this alone? Was Sasha involved? Was someone else pulling the strings from behind the curtain? The metal box still sat unopened in my drawer, a silent witness to whatever came next. Because now I understood. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was survival. The lock snapped with a sharp pop. Inside were no documents, no recordings, no elaborate explanation. Just a plain brown envelope and a worn Polaroid photo. The envelope contained a single page, a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Or at least what looked like it. But the name listed under mother was not the woman who raised me. It was someone I had never heard of. I blinked, trying to process it. Was this a forgery? A mistake? Then I looked closer. The hospital was the same. The date of birth matched mine exactly. But the name of the mother, Eleanor Whitfield meant nothing to me. Nothing until I noticed the photo. The Polaroid was old, slightly faded, but in it, there were 3 people, a younger David, no more than 25, smiling awkwardly in the center. A man with a shaved head on one side, scowling at the camera, and a woman who looked hauntingly familiar, not because I recognized her, but because I saw myself in her. The eyes. The shape of the mouth. It was like looking into a time-warped mirror. My hands trembled as I flipped the photo over. On the back was a date, 1996, and a single line written in smudged pen. She never should have been part of this. I couldn't breathe. The air around me thickened, my thoughts spiraling faster than I could catch them. David had never spoken about this woman. He told me he had no real family, no deep past worth digging into. But this photo said otherwise. And it said something else too, something I wasn't ready to face. He had known who I was long before we met. The realization hit like a freight train. Our accidental meeting at that pop-up event? Not an accident. His interest in my recipes? Not opportunism, it was obsession. If this woman in the photo, Eleanor, was my real mother, then David had known all along. And the timeline suddenly twisted into something darker. What if his relationship with me wasn't just manipulative but planned? I had to know more. I drove to the only person left who might have answers, my father. Or rather, the man I had believed was my father my entire life. We hadn't spoken in years. A quiet falling out over nothing in particular. But now, I needed the truth. He looked surprised when he opened the door, like seeing a ghost he thought he'd never have to face again. I didn't waste time. I pushed the photo and certificate into his hands and watched his face drain of color. I was hoping this would never come back, he said, voice flat, hands shaking slightly as he stared at the woman in the photo. You weren't supposed to find out. Not like this. I didn't say a word, just waited. Then, finally, he confessed. Eleanor Whitfield had been his girlfriend before he met my mother. She had gotten pregnant unexpectedly. There had been issues, mental health struggles, instability, dangerous connections. According to him, she'd become paranoid, started claiming she was being watched, that people were after her for what she knew. He dismissed it at the time. Then she disappeared. Vanished. Weeks later, he received a letter from her attorney stating she had voluntarily given up her parental rights and asked that he never contact her again. The child, me, was placed into his custody. Shortly after, he met my mother. They raised me together, never telling me the truth. But David, I asked, how does he know all this? My father looked away, jaw clenched, because Eleanor wasn't just some unstable woman. She was part of something bigger. A culinary institute. A research lab. Something experimental. She was working with a startup that was creating food profiles tied to emotional triggers, flavor science, way ahead of its time. She left the project after claiming they were using the data to manipulate people to target markets through emotional cuisine. David was part of that team. The words didn't make sense at first. Flavor science? Emotional cuisine? But then I thought about all those times he'd insisted we test certain dishes with focus groups, the way he always knew exactly what combinations would evoke comfort, nostalgia, hunger, or even sadness. He wasn't just a chef, he was using food as a psychological tool. And I was the missing ingredient. My palate, my recipes, they weren't just creative. They were programmed, passed down, refined, engineered. Everything I'd built had been part of something I didn't even understand. And David had been following me, shaping me, waiting for the mom. I backed away from the screen like it had bitten me. My mouth went dry. I stared at the image of the paused video, at her frozen in mid-motion, and I knew this was bigger than stolen recipes, bigger than a restaurant brand. Someone was orchestrating something far more dangerous. And I had walked into it blindly. I called the police again, showed them the footage. They took a copy but said without clear faces or identities, it could be anything. She's probably just hiding from someone, the officer said with a shrug. This doesn't prove foul play. But I knew what it was. A warning. A message. And not just to her, to me. Over the next few days, I felt watched. Subtle things kept happening. My car alarm went off randomly in the middle of the night. I'd find my front door unlocked, even though I knew I locked it. A stranger followed me out of a grocery store and then disappeared as soon as I crossed the street. I stopped using my phone for anything personal. I stopped sleeping. The paranoia wasn't paranoia anymore, it was pattern recognition. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully planned it all was. This wasn't just sabotage. It was containment. Isolation. Someone was cutting me off from every piece of my support system. And then I got the email. No subject line. No sender. Just a single line of text. If you go public, we release everything. Attached was a file labeled agreement /2017 / PDF. I opened it. It was a contract I had never seen before, with my forged signature at the bottom. A non-disclosure agreement that stated I had willingly relinquished all intellectual property to David Lawrence in exchange for marital consideration. It was backdated 5 years. If this file went public, it would make me look like a scorned woman trying to reclaim something I had legally given away. No court would side with me. No investor would touch me. I would be branded a fraud. I closed the laptop and sat in silence for what felt like hours. I was being cornered, discredited before I could even speak. And still, I didn't know who was behind all of it. Was David orchestrating this alone? Was Sasha involved? Was someone else pulling the strings from behind the curtain? The metal box still sat unopened in my drawer, a silent witness to whatever came next. Because now I understood, this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was survival. The lock snapped with a sharp pop. Inside were no documents, no recordings, no elaborate explanation. Just a plain brown envelope and a worn Polaroid photo. The envelope contained a single page, a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Or at least, what looked like it. But the name listed under mother was not the woman who raised me. It was someone I had never heard of. I blinked, trying to process it. Was this a forgery? A mistake? Then I looked closer. The hospital was the same. The date of birth matched mine exactly. But the name of the mother, Eleanor Whitfield *, meant nothing to me. Nothing until I noticed the photo. The Polaroid was old, slightly faded, but in it, there were 3 people, a younger David, no more than 25, smiling awkwardly in the center. A man with a shaved head on one side, scowling at the camera. And a woman who looked hauntingly familiar, not because I recognized her, but because I saw myself in her. The eyes. The shape of the mouth. It was like looking into a time-warped mirror. My hands trembled as I flipped the photo over. On the back was a date, 1996, and a single line written in smudged pen. She never should have been part of this. I couldn't breathe. The air around me thickened, my thoughts spiraling faster than I could catch them. David had never spoken about this woman. He told me he had no real family, no deep past worth digging into. But this photo said otherwise. And it said something else too, something I wasn't ready to face. He had known who I was long before we met. The realization hit like a freight train. Our accidental meeting at that pop-up event? Not an accident. His interest in my recipes? Not opportunism, it was obsession. If this woman in the photo, Eleanor, was my real mother, then David had known all along. And the timeline suddenly twisted into something darker. What if his relationship with me wasn't just manipulative but planned? I had to know more. I drove to the only person left who might have answers, my father. Or rather, the man I had believed was my father my entire life. We hadn't spoken in years. A quiet falling out over nothing in particular. But now I needed the truth. He looked surprised when he opened the door, like seeing a ghost he thought he'd never have to face again. I didn't waste time. I pushed the photo and certificate into his hands and watched his face drain of color. I was hoping this would never come back, he said, voice flat, hands shaking slightly as he stared at the woman in the photo. You weren't supposed to find out. Not like this. I didn't say a word, just waited. Then, finally, he confessed. Eleanor Whitfield had been his girlfriend before he met my mother. She had gotten pregnant unexpectedly. There had been issues, mental health struggles, instability, dangerous connections. According to him, she'd become paranoid, started claiming she was being watched, that people were after her for what she knew. He dismissed it at the time. Then she disappeared. Vanished. Weeks later, he received a letter from her attorney stating she had voluntarily given up her parental rights and asked that he never contact her again. The child, me, was placed into his custody. Shortly after, he met my mother. They raised me together, never telling me the truth. But David, I asked, how does he know all this? My father looked away, jaw clenched. Because Eleanor wasn't just some unstable woman. She was part of something bigger. A culinary institute. A research lab. Something experimental. She was working with a startup that was creating food profiles tied to emotional triggers, flavor science, way ahead of its time. She left the project after claiming they were using the data to manipulate people, to target markets through emotional cuisine. David was part of that team. It started with him, but it reached far beyond either of us. Still, I tried to rebuild. I opened a small restaurant on the edge of the city, something simple and soulful, tucked away from the chaos of trends and tech. No tracking software. No biometric scanners. Just food the way it was meant to be, real, imperfect, healing. I called it Eleanor's Table. A tribute to the woman I never got to know but somehow always carried in my DNA. The first dish on the menu was that same saffron mint risotto I made at the investor dinner so long ago. The one that stunned everyone silent. The one I thought was mine, only to later learn had been coded into me. But when I cooked it now, I didn't follow the old formula. I changed it, just slightly. Enough that it was no longer a test, but a choice. And I found something else in the process. Peace, maybe. Not the tidy kind. Not the kind you wrap in a bow and declare healing. But the kind that comes from knowing the worst has already happened, and you're still standing. People ask sometimes if I'm angry, if I want revenge, if I'd go back and stop it all from happening. But I don't think I would. Because through it all, I found the truth. Not just about David or Eleanor or the twisted science hidden behind flavor theory, but about myself. I wasn't created in a lab. I wasn't the product of anyone's plan. I was forged in the fire of betrayal and rebuilt by the power of memory, of resilience, a flavor that tells the truth when everything else lies. And yet there are nights I still feel it, that itch at the back of my neck, the sense that someone's watching, that this isn't truly over. That somewhere someone is still studying me. Testing. Waiting. A letter came last week. No return address. Just a typed note inside that read, *, you've only just scratched the surface. Come find us when you're ready, *. So maybe one day I will. But for now, I light a candle for Eleanor every night before service. I stir the stock. I taste the sauce. I write new recipes not to be consumed, but remembered. Because if food is memory and memory is power, then I have everything I need to keep going. And maybe, just maybe, rewrite the story on my own terms. One dish at a time. One truth at a time. One final bite before the next chapter begins.